Welcome to the Art of We podcast. Today, we're talking about how ambitious people, either single and dating or already in a partnership, can recognize when positive thinking becomes a pitfall in relationships. I know before meeting you, Will, I had this problem of overly thinking positively about what was going on inside of the relationship. For example, when there needed to be change, but it wasn't actually happening, or seeing in my partner that they had a lot of potential that I wanted them to live into, but they weren't actually on the same page of my vision for their life. And so it created a lot of frustration. And I think that people with ambitious goals, people who want to live into their calling, they have a tendency to really want a kind of partnership that matches that ambition.
And they're willing to work really hard to deliver the goods of the gifts and talents that they carry inside of themselves. And so there is this vulnerability to deal with unsatisfying dynamics in relationship by turning it back on yourself and saying, okay, well, this is probably my problem. If I can just figure this out myself and not demand of the person in front of me a different way of relating, then I'll get through it that way.
What's an example of that?
Well, I was in a long-term relationship before you where my orientation was dominated by that. I was in a Buddhist community for a long time in my previous marriage where one of the teachings was that my disturbance is not your problem. And so my job, if I'm feeling a disturbance in my partnership, is to relate to my disturbance myself and not involve my partner in that because it's not their disturbance. So it was this kind of reinforcement of silos, which gave me, as an achievement-oriented person, a project to work on where, okay, well, I just need to deal with my own suffering in this relationship.
Well, I think this is a good entry into defining more about what we're talking about today. Let's call this thing of thinking positively, overly positively, that gets us stuck in bad relationship patterns as a false positivity. If we define it as that, I'm going to read it as false positivity in relationships is the pattern of using optimism, achievement-oriented thinking, and growth mindset as mechanisms to override valid concerns, justify staying in misaligned partnerships, and rationalize investing in unfulfilling relationships. It's particularly seductive for ambitious people because it masquerades as the same kind of beneficial positive thinking that can serve them well in their careers. So I'm hearing three things in that. There's using optimism, achievement-oriented thinking, and growth mindset as mechanisms to override valid concerns. And what you were talking about was this achievement-oriented thinking that overrode valid concerns about your relationship. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, exactly.
It also sounds like you were caught in the growth mindset, because I've heard a lot of people talk about how they're in relationships, they're seeing something's wrong with the relationship or misaligned, and they're like, oh, it's my fault. I need to go fix myself, or I need to grow in these areas. And so it's almost like taking more responsibility for things that aren't working and not giving enough responsibility to the partner.
Absolutely. And for me, when I was in that dynamic, there was a benefit, quote unquote, to putting the load on my back. Two came to mind. Number one was I didn't have to risk conflict with my partner by naming things about her behavior or her mindset or how she talked to me or whatever that didn't work for me or caused impacts that I thought would be uncomfortable for me to talk about or for her to hear about. And then number two, it gave me this false sense of self-development that, the harder the relationship is, the more development I get to have.
How did that relationship turn out?
Well, I mean, we produced a beautiful, wonderful being in our daughter, Sophie, but
totally, of course.
There was definitely, so there was upside, but it was quite a bit of conflict and challenge there for years and years. I think this is a really important lens to look at cooperation, interdependency, and maybe a way to talk about it is secure functioning attachment dynamics between two adults who are committed in monogamy, where you decide that you're not going to name something that's uncomfortable to talk about because you're afraid of rupture. And that can create this kind of avoidance of challenge that stunts your growth as a couple because it doesn't present your partner with an opportunity to grow by experiencing the discomfort of being shown things that they may initially not like to hear, but if they have a growth oriented mindset, they're probably later going to at least say, thank you for helping me see that.
I agree. And one of the reasons why we're talking about this topic today is because for our listeners who really get the kind of partnership that we're standing for here on the Art of We podcast, the kind of relationship that is about supporting each other's greatest expression, greatest potential, having the relationship itself be of some form of service to the world. It doesn't mean we have to be in business, but we're committed to our relationship being a positive impact in the world. In order to have that kind of relationship, this kind of false positivity in the form of optimism, well, maybe false optimism, achievement oriented thinking, growth mindset as mechanisms to override valid concerns is not going to get you there. And I feel a little bit fierce about this topic. One, because before meeting you, I feel like I was using a lot of these mechanisms to override valid concerns. And two, because honestly, now isn't a time to fook around about partnerships that aren't aligned. Like
Yeah.
I feel really frustrated with people feeling like they don't have the skills and the tools and the resources to really stand for the kind of partnership that they deserve, the kind of partnership they want, and the kind of partnership, honestly, that matches or aligns with their ambition.
I really resonate with and love your fire on this topic. There must be a lot of people out there, and hopefully people who are listening to this show right now, who can identify places in their relationship life where they're being complacent or, being a little bit lazy, avoiding talking about something that needs to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I left my first marriage to go out and look for the kind of partnership that you and I have created, I left not knowing if this kind of partnership existed.
Right.
And it was a huge leap of faith. And honestly, it's, aside from creating my daughter, it's one of the things I'm most proud of in my life as an individual is to take that leap of faith in service of the conviction that there was something bigger and better that I could leap toward. So I agree with you. The time is here for folks to rally together and not accept suboptimal or mediocre relationship lives together.
Right. And it's easy for us to say because we have taken that risk and here we are now in this kind of really secure functioning, meaning there's a lot of trust here, there's a lot of security here inside of our partnership where we walk our talk, we do our practices, we have these agreements that keep us aligned and on track with what we're up to in the world. And I hear a lot of suffering out there, especially for people who have the similar kind of calling and ambition that we have to contribute to the world.
So let's talk about how this can show up in a relationship. And you have a story to tell about dating someone before we met each other that I think fits a certain kind of paradigm that we're trying to talk about today, having to do with hoping that a person's going to change according to what our inner values are or our desires are, or our ambitions are, that might not actually be what their desires and ambitions are.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of the gentleman that I was dating who was a fitness coach here in town, and he was really good at what he did. And I have this thing, because it's a value of mine, to see the potential of something, whether it's a person or an idea or really anything that I'm excited about. So when I met this man, and I saw his skills and I appreciated who he was and we started dating, I was like, wow, this guy could go a lot further than one-on-one with people. Like this guy he could start a whole YouTube channel. He could start a whole movement about this different way that he's doing this. And I got very excited about that. And of course, I kind of assumed that doesn't anybody want to maximize their contribution to make this a better world? And
Right.
so I had this kind of an achievement-oriented thinking that was put towards the relationship, which I don't think is an issue, but it's an issue when the person doesn't resonate with that. And they're kind of like, well, that's not really what I want to be doing. And I'm glad you're excited for me and you value me, but I'm not really interested in going out and doing what it would take to do that. But I think that just is an example of me attempting to see potential in somebody that's not actually aligned with the same kind of ambitious calling that I have for this lifetime. I think that's one area that can be very frustrating. The other area that I've also experienced in being in relationship prior to you was experiencing challenges in a partnership where we would talk about it, and specifically the partner would be like, okay, yes, I can see why this is a challenge for us. I want to change my behavior. I'm going to do that. So I'm like, all right, like thinking positively, there's hope. Great. We're going to make it through this. He's willing to change. He's willing to grow. And then, a few weeks later, we're kind of back in the same pattern. And this happens over and over, where it's this cycle of positive thinking and then kind of despair. But I stay in it because I'm hooked by the positive thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's easy to get stuck in these loops, and I've been there too. And that's where I think paying attention to your partner's behavior rather than their words is a good litmus test of what their values really are.
And I think that, yes, and I think that this positive thinking habit, like you and I talked about earlier, could be this denial of what's actually really happening.
Yeah, and there can be, like in this case you were talking about with the fitness trainer, there can be like a hope that you've met the person that is going to be your partner, right? And you can maybe skip over the really important due diligence step of, wait, hold on, does this person actually share the value that I have on, like you said, what's the maximum impact I can have on the world?
Right, exactly.
And so there's what's the word I'm looking for? An ungrounded or a kind of overly positive way of evaluating relationships that do ourselves a disservice, where we're giving other people more, we're ascribing more to them than they deserve, or we're thinking that we have more influence over the outcome than what's really true about any situation.
Right. If you've been successful in your life in one or more areas, you could be like, "Hey, I've been successful in these areas. Why can't I be successful in changing this person to have them be exactly the way that I want them to be?"
100%.
I think it's pretty
100%.
common.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, we can share some other questions and some things to think about, and maybe even warning signs about if you're getting into this overly positive thinking that's actually creating more frustration inside of your partnership or people you're dating. We'll be right back. We hope you're enjoying this episode. I want to take a quick break to let you know about a gift we created for you and your partner. We compiled our top 10 relationship agreements that have been so powerful in supporting the success of our partnership that we even turned them into our wedding vows. These agreements help us stay connected, growing, and thriving as a couple, and they've been critical to help us create a kind of we that's way beyond what we've ever experienced before. You can download this free gift at KristaVanderveer.com. That's KristaVanderveer.com. Also, if you enjoy our podcast, it would be so meaningful to us if you left us a rating and review. Not only does it help others find us, but it gives us critical feedback on how we're doing. Thanks in advance, and now back to the episode. Welcome back. Let's talk about some indicators or warning signs. If you happen to be in this kind of overly positive thinking mode that actually isn't helping your partnership, what are some warning signs? One might be always focusing on what could be in your partnership or who your partner could evolve into.
And that could extend to whenever you go to your trusted friends to talk about your relationship, you're only talking about how much better it's getting, or the potential that you see in it, or the good parts. and you're not sharing the intractable challenges that you're experiencing.
I would say if you have a tendency in your current partnership or in dating to have these cycles of like hope and hopelessness, or
Yeah.
excitement and then doubt, or things are moving forward and then frustration. If you're having those cycles, that might be an indication that you're not being either fully revealed with yourself about what's happening inside the partnership, or you're not having a really deep, explicit conversation with the person about what's going on for them and what they're wanting.
Right. I mean, you're probably operating from a younger part of yourself if you're going into cycles of hope and hopelessness, because it sounds to me like a child's perspective that, you go into big hope that your partner that you're dating is the one who is going to be the one. And then you throw them in the dungeon when you find out that they're, falling off the pedestal and they're not meeting your criteria, as opposed to the maybe more practical, more adult, more grounded practice of like, hey, let's write out what our priorities and plans and goals and desires are for our life, and let's see if they match up or not with each other.
Definitely. The indicator that you brought forward earlier on this conversation around thinking that it's just you that needs to grow inside the relationship. I mean, potentially in the worst case scenario, or not even worse, but in a bad case scenario, you might be gaslit by your partner and they're not taking responsibility for some of the challenges in your relationship. And they're saying that it's you that needs to change. And then you're like, oh, maybe it is me that needs to change. There can be this really like snake eating its tail feeling of, I'm not good enough. I can't seem to make any progress here. It must be me kind of experience. And if that's happening, then I think it's probably time to get another opinion. Like you were saying, we'll go to some friends to reveal what's happening, to really get an outside party's view.
Yeah. One of the things I've learned in my life, there's a sort of typology, or maybe you could say an archetype, of kids who grew up in a home where there was an alcoholic parent, and there's a whole group of people who meet on a regular basis called adult children of alcoholic parents. And the archetype is kind of interesting to me because I grew up in a home like that, where there's this sense of, if I work harder, if I am more perfect, if I do better than the person, and this is for people who are dating or in a long-term relationship, my partner will act right, or be nicer to me, or be more committed, or all the things that the child had an unmet need about. And so, and this might be a bit of a subset of our listeners here, but I just want to speak to the fact that these patterns that we notice about ourselves as adults come to us honestly, as one therapist said to me. They're strategies, but what we're talking about here today is they can be very counterproductive in terms of creating the vibrant, healthy adult partnership that we want.
Definitely. I have some questions that listeners can ask themselves, but do you have any other kind of like key indicators or warning signs that you would want to add to this?
I would just say, if there's a building sense inside of you that you keep avoiding a difficult conversation, I think that's a warning sign. But I'd love to hear your questions.
Great. So one question goes back to this using positivity to avoid something painful, which basically is kind of what you just said. So I think a question that you can ask yourself, if you're seeing any of these patterns, is, am I using positivity as a way to cover up something that I'm not actually facing in myself, or the truth of this situation? Another question is, am I appreciating what is in this relationship, who I am now, who my partner is now? Or am I always focused on what could be? And I think that that's a tricky one, because I think it's really important for us to honestly hold the potential of who we're becoming and the potential of who our partner is becoming. But it needs to be in alignment with each of our beings. It can't be something that's like, if I'm holding something for you, Will, and you're like, that's just not a fit for me, I mean, that's not going to work. So am I appreciating what is, or am I always focused on what could be? And are we aligned about that? Another question could be, does this relationship or this dynamic energize my mission, my personal mission, or does it drain it? And if you've been listening to The Art of We and you already have kind of a mission and vision for your own partnership, you could also ask that question about your partnership. Does this relationship energize this mission that we've stated that we want to be on together, this vision for our relationship, or does it drain it? And one more question would be, am I trying to optimize something that's fundamentally misaligned?
I'm laughing because my best friend in college was one of the only people who could see what was wrong with my relationship with my girlfriend. And his way of saying what you just said was, well, you can't polish a turd.
Well, there you go. I guess the question could be, am I trying to polish a turd?
Yeah. It just falls
one.
apart. So there you have it. You can't polish a turd. That's the punchline of our episode here today. Thank you for joining us.
And if you're noticing that positive thinking isn't getting you the results that you want in a relationship, then it's probably an indication that you could also imagine that that kind of thinking may not be getting you what you want in different areas of your life as well. And if you're confused about what you're wanting and you're not standing for it, you're probably going to attract chaos. But if you're more clear about what you want and you're standing for that, you probably will attract alignment. I feel like that's what really happened for me in getting really clear about what I wanted before I met you, Will. And the first date we had was like we were both super clear about that, about what we wanted, and it happened to align. And here we are, almost 8 years later.
Crazy, right? Yeah. And maybe just a final word of advice. It's really hard to see with clarity from inside of these dynamics within yourself. So having key trusted friends who are willing to call you out on your bullshit and say uncomfortable things to you, help you see your blind spots and so on. I mean, I don't know how I would have been able to, get to where I am today, which is not, enlightened, but it's much further along than where I was in, bearing the burden of, the patterns of childhood. So it's just hugely helpful to cultivate those friendships and alliances. And it's a virtuous cycle because everyone can help each other, and you don't need you really only need one person, but having a core group is really helpful.
I agree 100%. Thank you for bringing that in. So hopefully this episode was valuable to those of you who have these tendencies like I have had in my previous life before Will, and know how much we care about you and your journey and what you're here to bring to the world.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.